Good evening. Thank you all for joining the third of our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan webinar series. Tonight's topic is Getting to 80 by 30, your transportation vision for Palo Alto. 80 by 30 is Palo Alto's goal to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% from 1990 levels by 2030. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen. Today's moderator will be Karin North from Public Works. Your presenters are Sylvia from the Office of Transportation and me, Hiromi, from Utilities. We also have a great team of experts online to help answer your questions. We have Rosie, Nathan, Jonathan, and Shiva, just to name a few. I also want to mention that there are many individuals across multiple departments who have been working on the topics of mobility and electric vehicles. So my colleague Christine Long found this cartoon, which I think perfectly illustrates what's been happening in our world. 2020 has been quite the year for all of us. We just experienced 8 of the largest fires in California's history. And if that, combined with COVID, weren't enough, we're seeing a resurgence of COVID at alarming rates. And then, of course, we'll be dealing with a long recession. And while these crises are urgent, we can't ignore climate change. We already see the effects of climate change with the increase in extreme weather events and larger and more destructive wildfires. It's the biggest wave of them all. It's the crisis that could be our downfall. But we have the opportunity to slow things down, maybe even turn things around if we act now. We're in the process of updating the 2016 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which set the bold goal of 80% carbon reduction from 1990 levels by 2030. While greenhouse gas emissions reduction is not the only goal of the SCAP, it is a major one. So how are we doing? We're down 36% from the 1990 baseline, but we still need to reduce about 300,000 metric tons of carbon to reach 80 by 30. The SCAP has 7 chapters or sections, and today we'll focus on the 2 sections which have the greatest potential to lower greenhouse gas emissions: mobility and electric vehicles. Staff has come up with a spectrum of ideas on how we might be able to achieve our climate goals, which we'd like to share, but we also really want to hear from you and get your feedback. The main sources of Palo Alto's greenhouse gas emissions are 1/3 from natural gas use in buildings, that's the blue section, and 2/3 from gasoline and diesel vehicles. Road transportation, the big red section, represents Palo Alto's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions at about 64%. It's important to note that studies have shown that approximately half of the city's emissions comes from inbound traffic. That means 50% of road transport emissions are from residents and 50% from traffic coming into Palo Alto. In carbon terms, this section represents about 300,000 metric tons of carbon, and to reach 80 by 30, emissions from road transport needs to drop about 240,000 metric tons. So why does road transportation produce so much carbon? Well, there are upstream emissions and tailpipe emissions. Upstream emissions are the greenhouse gases associated with the production and distribution of gasoline and electricity. This includes everything from emissions from extracting oil from the ground, transporting it to the refinery, refining oil into gasoline, and then transporting gasoline to service stations, each step which produces greenhouse gases. And then, of course, driving a car fueled up with gasoline creates tailpipe emissions. And this includes carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And these gases other than carbon are important to note, as they have a global warming potential up to 300 times higher than carbon dioxide. A typical gas-fueled passenger vehicle in the US emits 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, or 1 pound per mile. And this assumes the average gasoline vehicle gets about 22 miles a gallon and drives a little over 11,000 miles a year. In California, this number could run lower as the average car here tends to get better mileage. In contrast, EVs have no tailpipe emissions. However, there may be emissions created during the production and distribution of electricity used to fuel the EV. In Palo Alto, however, our utilities provides clean electricity, which makes the justification for driving an EV for trips that cannot be made on foot or by bike especially compelling. So where does our electricity come from? Palo Alto's electricity has been 100% carbon neutral since 2013. What does this mean? It means that on an annual basis, we purchase electricity from non-carbon emitting sources, such as solar, wind, landfill gas, or small and large-scale hydroelectric, that matches the total amount of electricity demand within our city. The pie chart here is from our 2019 power content label, when hydroelectric generation was higher than long-term averages. However, on average rain years, carbon-free hydroelectric power meets about 50% of electricity demand, and that combined with 50% of Palo Alto's electricity coming from renewable energy sources enables us to deliver 100% carbon neutral electricity. So Sylvia, next slide.
Thanks, Romy. The reductions in greenhouse gas emissions for the city fall into the 4 categories you see on this slide. The bottom 2 relate to fossil fuel use in residential and commercial buildings, and you can view the webinar about building electrification at the Climate Action website at the bottom of this slide. The top 2 categories relate to our topic tonight, reducing transportation-related greenhouse gases through electrifying the majority of vehicle trips and by reducing vehicle miles traveled, or gas-fueled VMT. Because it generally takes 15 to 20 years for a vehicle fleet to turn over without intervention in the market, conversion to electric vehicles in Palo Alto will need to be accompanied by shifting to cleaner modes of travel if we want to hit the 80 by 30 target. And it may be obvious, but conversion to electric vehicles does nothing to improve traffic congestion and parking problems, which Palo Altans say impact their quality of life. Palo Alto is well suited for greater reductions in car driving with its good weather, flat terrain, sidewalks, and good biking infrastructure. For local role models and how to reduce VMT, look at our own Pali and Gunn High School students who already make more than half of school trips by means other than a family car. It's normal to walk and bike to school here. In order to meet Council's 80 by 30 goal and impact parking and traffic, we will need to change the mix of modes we use for local trips. Next slide. Cities all over the world are struggling with the transition to clean transportation and what this means for their built environments. This graphic from the city of Melbourne, Australia shows both the carbon footprint and the space footprint of various modes of transportation along the spectrum from dirty to clean. The black balloons above show the greenhouse gas emissions of gas-powered cars and motorcycles, as well as the emissions from electric cars in transit that are powered from the electric grid in Melbourne. When comparing our local emissions to this graphic, I noticed a few things. First, Palo Alto Utilities is already using green power. Second, Caltrain will be electrified in a few years, making it quieter, faster, and more reliable. And third, VTA buses will be electrified by 2040. The green footprints below the line show the space needed in square meters per single occupant for each mode. A green transportation strategy that relies solely on conversion to electric vehicles leaves us with the status quo problems of parking and traffic. You can see from this slide that redesigning roadways so that more pedestrians and cyclists feel safer to use the road will make our roads more efficient, as more people will be able to use them at the same time, reducing traffic congestion and parking problems. Next slide. In this webinar, we highlight the goals and key actions that have the highest potential greenhouse gas reductions for Council to evaluate. The goal for mobility and EVs is a shared one, to reduce greenhouse gases from the transportation sector. Making Palo Alto a place that is much easier to access without a car will be as important as converting the resident and commuter vehicle fleet to EVs. For mobility, the 4 goals here focus on reducing driving by shifting to active transportation, improving transit and other mobility options, creating neighborhoods where walking, biking, and transit are easiest for meeting daily needs, and by using pricing signals like paid parking to reduce driving.
For the EV side of things, as crazy as this may sound, the goal is to strive to convert 80% of both resident and commuter vehicles to EVs by 2030, and to build a charging network that would support this level of EV adoption. Although these goals may seem like a stretch, if you think that most of the cars on the road right now will be retired over the next decade, and if the majority of these cars are replaced with EVs or not at all, because more people may continue to work from home, this could help us get pretty close to reducing 240,000 metric tons of carbon in 10 years.
Next, to accomplish our goals, we need to look at a range of key actions from which we could select. From our current voluntary market-driven solutions on the left, through the middle column with ordinances and the like, which we've also used, and onto the right-hand column with voter-approved mandates and potentially voter-approved fees, taxes, or bonds, where heavy lifting is involved. The governor's recent executive order about the ban on the sale of new gasoline vehicles in California by 2035 is an example of intervention in the market to move the state towards its climate goals. Due to the pandemic's financial impacts, for the next 2 years, we may need to focus on the most low-cost areas and lower certainty key actions, and not necessarily the highest greenhouse gas reducing tools. It's pretty clear that low and moderate interventions will not be enough to reach our goals, so we're likely going to need to explore different funding streams via ballot measures, bond measures, or a carbon fund to help us meet our objectives. And before diving into this slide, I want to point out that we're including more key actions in the SCAP than needed to get to the 80 by 30 goal, so that council will have choices in what key actions are ultimately selected. We're including key actions that will be difficult, expensive, and/or inconvenient to achieve. Some of these potential key actions will require additional legal analysis and coordination with other agencies, such as the California Energy Commission, before being presented to council for final selection. Others may require voter approval and could ultimately be included in a potential ballot measure. These are the top 6 mobility key actions with the highest potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. Number 1, provide safer infrastructure for vulnerable road users, such as children, seniors, pedestrians, and bicyclists, to reduce single occupancy vehicle, or SOV, use for work trips. Number 2, reduce SOV mode share using pricing to manage our parking supply and adjust parking requirements. 3, build transit supportive networks that allow buses to move faster than regular traffic. 4, enhance the efficiency of the existing traffic signal system to reduce idling. 5, improve our trip reduction strategies, also known as transportation demand management, or TDM, including encouraging telecommuting as a new norm. 6, create neighborhoods that locate more people close to the goods and services they need, so they can more easily walk, bike, or take transit for errands and work. How might we measure our success with these strategies? Some cities are using new metrics to see how walkable and bikeable they are. One test asks, can you purchase a pint of milk within a 10-minute walk? Another test asks, can you access all the services you need within a 20-minute walk, bike ride, or transit trip?
Really good questions. For the EV area, we have a proposed range of 15 key actions, but the 4 listed here are the key actions with the highest potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation or vehicles. Number 1, require a percentage of all parking spaces at Palo Alto's 800+ multifamily properties to install EV chargers. Most single-family homeowners are finding it relatively easy to install an EV charger at home. Some even choose not to install an EV charger and simply plug into a standard wall outlet. However, these options are usually not available to 42% of Palo Alto households living at a multifamily property. That's about 10,000 households, and the city already has programs to help these properties install EV chargers with rebates and technical assistance. Number 2, require a percentage of EV charger installations at all commercial parking lots. Teleworking may remain the new norm long after COVID, which would be great, as half of the emissions from road transportation come from inbound traffic. Needless to say, every large corporate campus needs to ask themselves whether it makes sense to have banks of EV chargers for their employees. I met the facility manager for a large tech company in Mountain View a couple of years ago, and he said that they were already in the process of installing EV chargers at 25% of all of their parking spaces. For a parking lot with 10,000 spaces, that's 2,500 EV chargers. I've never seen 2,500 EV chargers at once, but this is the kind of future we need to envision to make 80% EV adoption a reality. And before I talk about number 3 and number 4, I want to reiterate that these are proposed key actions. Like Sylvia said, these proposals still need legal review to see if the city has the authority to do something like this, and ultimately may need voter approval. So number 3 is meant to disincentivize the ownership or use of a fossil fuel vehicle. This means consider the application of a fee, tax, or assessment to both residential households and workplaces, and utilize that revenue to incentivize EV adoption and reduction of vehicle miles traveled. Number 4, ban the registration of gasoline vehicles in Palo Alto by 2030. When we initially wrote this about 6 months ago, it felt wild and crazy. But thankfully, with the governor's proposal to do the same by 2035, it helps normalize our proposal, and FYI, this alone could achieve about half of the greenhouse gas emission reductions we're aiming for. Sylvia?
Thanks. Getting to 80 by 30 starts today. So let's look at some of the transportation choices available in town and how they fit into a green future. Here's a table listing most of our travel choices in town and some of their effects, such as producing greenhouse gases, impacting parking or congestion, and adding to our daily stress. The green plus signs indicate a beneficial effect, and a red minus sign indicates a negative one. Palo Altans consistently rank parking and traffic issues as high priorities. The gas car is negative in every category, and electric cars, except for their lack of emissions, are still negative in all other categories. Similarly, Uber and Lyft might cause less stress for the rider who isn't driving, but these services, which won't be electric until 2030, add to local congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. Some people think of electric cars as guilt-free driving, but as you can see in this table, driving an EV for a short trip in town, for example, driving a few blocks to a congested school zone, has a greater impact than walking or biking there. During this time, when so many of us are working from home, many people are enjoying living locally, meaning that they can walk, bike, or take transit to meet their daily needs. More people living locally like this would help us meet our 80 by 30 goal. In Palo Alto, cars, even electric cars, are not always the best option, especially for short in-town trips, which are the great majority of trips. Nationwide, 81% of trips between 1 and 2 miles long are made by car, and these are the trips that can be targeted for walking, biking, and transit. One encouraging nationwide trend is the popularity of e-bikes, particularly cargo e-bikes that carry children and still have lots of room for groceries and other items. E-bikes allow cyclists to reach longer distances, and for many households, could replace the need to buy a car. If you must replace your next vehicle, you may want to consider an e-bike for all the reasons listed on this slide. And there's a hot tip for e-bike customers from our air district. Income qualified families can receive $7,500 for an e-bike when they turn in a gas-powered car that dates from 2005 or older.
I love all the non-driving options. Well, driving may not be the best option for short in-town trips. If you do need to drive, we know that switching to EVs will help us reduce emissions. And that's why Gavin Newsom signed that executive order banning the sale of gas cars by 2035. Worldwide, in 2018, the number of EVs grew a staggering 64%. But there are definitely barriers preventing people from going EVs. General consensus is that people perceive battery EVs to be more expensive than ICE or internal combustion engine vehicles. People are concerned about how far they can drive in an EV, range anxiety, whereas gas stations are reliable. Everyone knows when and where they need to go to fill up with gas, and gas stations have those bright, large signs. With some EVs, a giant screen in the car will show you exactly where the next fast charger is and how many are available. Other charging stations are a bit more discreet, and you have to open up your phone and look at an app and see where EV chargers are located. But rest assured, every month, more chargers are being added across the country. And to date, there are over 67,000 EV charging stations in California. On top of the growing number of options for charging, many EVs offer longer ranges, and as battery prices decrease, EV prices are expected to come down as well. Only time will tell if Elon Musk's prediction that a $25,000 fully autonomous EV with 300-mile range will be available within a few years. However, the reality is there are already over 600,000 EV drivers in California, and in Palo Alto, 1 in 7 of your neighbors already drives an EV, and there are over 60 models to choose from. The big question is, which is cheaper to own? The answer? It's complicated. It depends on how much a person drives and where and how much they spend on fueling. For this table, I tried to select 3 economy models with similar pricing. The Hyundai Kona Electric and the Nissan Leaf in the 2 right columns have a higher list price than the gas Hyundai Kona. But with federal tax incentives of $7,500, that's what you see in red, and possibly other rebates and incentives, the price of the car becomes significantly lower than the list price. As for maintenance fees, for the gas Hyundai, the costs are about double that of the all-electric models. EVs simply have less parts, which means less maintenance. Insurance fees are about the same, and then it comes down to how much will you spend on fueling. The assumption in this model is that each car will drive 11,000 miles a year for 10 years, and gas is calculated at a conservative $3 a gallon. The electricity is calculated at 19.4 cents per kilowatt hour, which is the Tier 2 residential rate, or the most common rate for Palo Alto residents. I use this number as studies show that anywhere from 70 to 90% of EV drivers charge at home. The gas Hyundai gets 26 miles a gallon, and the EVs each have over 200 miles of range. So if you look at the annual cost of ownership, the gas Hyundai comes out to be slightly less than the electric version, but the Nissan Leaf actually comes out to be cheaper. And Palo Alto has partnered with the California Air Resources Board and other California utilities to offer customers up to $1,500 off electric cars. This program just launched yesterday and is called the Clean Fuel Rewards Program, making EV pricing more attractive for all California residents. And here's another comparison. I'm going to call this the Model 3 comparison, as this is the #1 selling car in California this year. For this table, I selected 3 cars with similar manufacturer list prices: the gas Audi, a Toyota hybrid, and the all-electric Model 3. Although now we know for sure that all Californians can get $1,500 off a Tesla, for this table, I ran the model assuming no incentives. Again, for an EV, maintenance is about half that of the other 2 models. Insurance is the same, and fueling costs for the Toyota hybrid are about half that of the Audi, but still more than the Model 3. As you can see, even without any incentives, the annual cost of ownership of the Model 3 is cheaper than the Audi or the Toyota hybrid. Despite the perception that EVs are more expensive due to the price of the vehicle being higher than their gas counterparts, the actual cost of ownership over the lifetime of an EV is comparable or even cheaper than a gas car. If you've never done so, I highly suggest going to our EV landing page at cityofpaloalto.org/EV and play with our EV cost calculator tool. Not ready to buy an EV? Well, many people choose to lease EVs, and also the used EV market is another great way to go EV. And now we want to get into some case studies. So we want to look at some customer groups. The first demographic we want to take a look at is someone in their golden years, an empty nester, probably retired, a longtime Palo Alto resident. This customer segment tends to have modest to low household incomes, and they own 1 to 2 cars per household. However, many of their trips tend to be local. Sylvia, how could the city help this resident transition to a greener transportation future?
Thanks, Hiromi. I am very interested in working with our older population. Older adults represent a growth opportunity for our mobility work in town. I often hear residents say that they are too old to bike. Well, don't tell that to Ginny, who is pictured here in Midtown on her adult trike after a joyful ride down Ross Road. The SCAP proposes a Safe Routes for Older Adults program that would empower older adults to learn about and advocate for more walking, biking, and transit opportunities for getting around town. Adult trikes, electric bikes, and biking classes for older adults could be a part of this program. Imagine bike parties for seniors, physically distanced and masked, of course, that land downtown or at the farmer's market. In addition, a Safe Routes for Older Adults program could teach residents to use VTA services and Caltrain, future on-demand transit options, car sharing services, and ride sharing services. While reducing greenhouse gas emissions, a program like this would increase personal mobility and reduce traffic congestion. What could the city do to help folks with EVs, Hiromi, if they have to drive longer distances?
Well, if they have to drive, we want residents to take advantage of the numerous incentives and rebates available for EVs. We just updated our table with all federal, state, and local incentives for EVs, as well as e-bikes, which you can find on our EV landing page. Due to COVID, we needed to stop in-person workshops and ride and drive events, but we hope to start these up again virtually, so please stay tuned. Also, if you can't charge at home, publicly accessible EV charging infrastructure is expanding, making it easier than ever to find a place to charge. So the next demographic we want to take a look at are the families with children. This group only accounts for 12% of households in Palo Alto, but they tend to be very engaged and account for about 50% of program participation of all the programs offered by utilities. These are the families with school-aged children, and they tend to own 2 to 3 cars per household. Sylvia, how could the city help this family transition to a greener transportation future?
Thanks, Hiromi. I would connect this family to our fabulous Safe Routes to School coordinators or their school's amazing PTA transportation safety representative, who can help them integrate biking, walking, carpooling, and transit into their daily school commutes, as well as into other trips. Our coordinators can help families consider replacing one of their cars with one of the child-carrying bicycles that you see on our streets now, including the cargo e-bikes I mentioned earlier that are making biking with the family in tow a breeze. When you arrive at school by bike, you never have to wait in the drop-off line, and you get rockstar parking. Almost 60% of our public school students bike or walk to school. When students can walk or bike on their own, parents are freed from school transportation duties. Kids enjoy a sense of freedom and independence. And kids get the exercise they need, which coincidentally readies their brains to learn. New residents to Palo Alto often tell us that one reason they move here is so that they and their kids can live locally. At the same time, we know that there is a large group of interested but concerned would-be bicyclists out there who want to bike but don't feel safe riding in traffic or in striped bike lanes with or without their kids. Upgraded facilities with protective elements are needed to entice these folks onto their bikes. Staff invites parents and all residents to participate in the upcoming update of our bicycle and pedestrian plan, which will help determine the investments the city will make into our bicycle and pedestrian network. Also, expanding transit options in town for everyone is a city goal. City staff are applying for a grant that would bring on-demand transit to Palo Alto, kind of like Uber Pool, but with minivans. If transit is deemed safe again and the city wins a grant, this new model of transit service could be used by students and others within a particular area for all kinds of trips, including school trips. How can the city help this family obtain an EV, Hiromi, if they need to go a very long distance?
Well, with more than one car in the family, our hope is that at least one of the vehicles can be an EV or an e-bike. That would be awesome. There are multiple incentives and rebates, and to see the list, go to cityofpaloalto.org/EV. And this includes information about the $1,500 Clean Fuel Rewards point of sale rebate I mentioned earlier. And also nonprofits like Drive Clean Bay Area are also running their second annual EV preferred pricing campaign, which runs through December 5th. And for more information on that, you can go to their webpage, which is drivecleanbayarea.org. We're also working on building out EV charging infrastructure throughout the city, like I mentioned, including some projects at places of worship, and we've completed some large projects at some of the schools with more to come. Our hope is that seeing rows of EV chargers will start to help shift the mindset around electric vehicles. In the next year, we also hope to launch climate education programs for teens and elementary school children and their parents. The last customer segment we want to look at are the singles, who account for a surprisingly high 53% of our households. They may not be as engaged with utilities programs as the families with kids, but still account for 26% of program participation. These individuals are relatively frugal. The internet is their main source of entertainment, news, and shopping, and they tend to embrace the gig economy. Lastly, these individuals may or may not own a car. Sylvia, how could the city help this resident transition to a greener transportation future?
Thanks again, Hiromi. It sounds like some of the folks in this cohort might be living locally already and walking or biking for trips of 2 miles or less. The city could support that further by creating the conditions for more walkable, bikeable, vibrant neighborhoods with nearby shopping and services. Investments in protected bicycle infrastructure, expanded bike parking, and bicycle safety education could serve these residents, as would improved transit options. As this group is more likely to use transit, city efforts to develop transit supportive roadways and technology that help buses avoid long vehicle queues would be important. Additionally, for those who live car-free, car sharing services like Zipcar and ride sharing services like Uber and Lyft would also support these residents in the few times they need a car. Our bike share and e-scooter program could also serve this group once the pandemic allows for the community engagement and orientation events needed to launch these programs in town. What could the city do for single households going longer distances, Hiromi?
Well, this is the group which tends to lead the way with the adoption of the latest and greatest developments in technology. With all electric, driverless, on-demand ride-sharing services, most likely to become a reality in the next decade, owning a car may become a moot point. However, if this customer wants to own an EV, incentives, which were mentioned earlier, are available. And for these customers, the majority who are renters living at a multifamily property, we have a rebate program for multifamily properties to install EV chargers, as well as free technical assistance to help property owners wrap their heads around the technical aspects of installing charging infrastructure. It takes a while to complete a project at any commercial site, but over the next couple of years, we expect to see hundreds of chargers installed at multifamily properties throughout Palo Alto. And now we'd like to ask you some questions. And I think I can't see your screen right now, but I think it's okay, I see it. So question number 1, what are some barriers that prevent you from going EV? Please select all that apply. And poll question number 2. Now that you know that EVs could be as affordable as a comparable gas vehicle, if you are interested in an EV, what could the city provide to help you make this decision? Please select all that apply.
And then scrolling down, poll question number 3, would you support protected bike lanes on busier streets if it meant less available street parking? Protected bike lanes have barriers between moving vehicles and the bike lane. And then question number 4, would you support a ballot measure that raises funds to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? So if everyone's had a chance to answer, I think Joanna, who's working the poll in the back, will share with us the results.
Cost, range, EV charging at multifamily. Oh, cannot install EV charging single family. My current car is not ready for retirement. That's the number 1 answer. And you know what? No one's saying get rid of a perfectly fine, efficient vehicle.
Right.
We want you to consider going EV for your next vehicle.
Right.
So I'm so glad you're, yeah.
But
or get rid of the vehicle, yeah.
Well, we are saying, you know, consider not using it as much. If you can, mostly doing in-town trips, consider.
And if you're interested in an EV, what could the city provide? The number 1 is special electricity rate for EVs. Maybe someone can address this later. We're working on it. It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And more EV chargers. We're working on this, and rebates. We're working on this as well, okay? And ooh, look at the answers for the bike lanes.
Yeah.
86% say yes.
Yep.
And ballot measure, 72% say yes.
All right.
Very interesting. Thank you.
All right.
Wow, that gives me chills. 72% said yes. I don't know, maybe it's just this group. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Oh, and there will be a post-webinar survey if you want to elaborate more on your answers, and we have some extra questions in there as well.
So we have a series of webinars planned on the following topics. We're striving to make the webinars as interactive as possible and provide ample opportunity for feedback. All of the webinars will be recorded and posted along with the presentations on our website at cityofpaloalto.org/climate-action. Registration links for the webinars can also be found on our website, and stay for the Q&A session that is coming up. Thank you so much for your time and attention to this vital issue in our community.
And if you have questions and have not yet submitted them, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and send them to us. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. Also, please check out cityofpaloalto.org/EV, which details all the programs in today's webinar, including the EV calculator tool, table of available EV rebates and incentives, and details about our EV charger rebates and technical assistance program for multifamily and nonprofit properties.
And for those interested in the programs I mentioned, like Safe Routes to School and the Bicycle Plan Update, check out the Office of Transportation webpage, the Safe Routes webpage, and the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee webpage.
Okay, I will stop sharing my screen so we could get into the Q&A.
Sorry, I jumped on and showed my face a little too early. So welcome to everybody that's here on the webinar. My name is Karen North, and I'm going to help try and facilitate some of the Q&A. I just wanted to let everybody know that we're really trying to get everyone to put in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, not the chat. So if you put something in the chat, please copy it and put it into the Q&A, because we're really monitoring the Q&A and not the chat at this point in time. So Hiromi, how can you ban registration of gasoline cars? Shouldn't you simply allow those cars to slowly phase out due to age?
Yes, that would be awesome, but then that doesn't prevent someone from buying another fossil fuel vehicle. You know, I think Gavin Newsom's executive order it sounds extreme, but it's happening in other parts of the world. And I think, like I said earlier, we're not telling people to get rid of your perfectly running cars right now. I mean, most cars that were built within the last 10 years have good mileage, don't have a lot of emissions. So we're not saying get rid of those right now. We don't want to create unnecessary waste. That's the last thing we want. However, if you are going to replace that vehicle, which will most likely happen within the next decade, we want people to really think about, are they going to go EV, or can they go without that car, which I think will become easier and easier.
Great, thank you, Hiromi. Sylvia, since 50% of traffic usage is inbound from out of the city, what do you suggest that could be done to reduce the inbound traffic?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things. Number one, every other city is also faced with the same challenge that we have here. So our hope is that, you know, all of us will be doing something to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our transportation. So this conversation is happening elsewhere as well. We can make it easier to get here without a car. We're talking to VTA, we're looking into VTA to give us more service. We're looking at, as I said, we're applying for grant money so that we can bring an on-demand transit system to Palo Alto. And as I mentioned before, I think we need to make it easier for people to bike here. And part of that is changing what our roads look like so that we have more protected facilities so people feel safer biking here. There are a lot of trips that are local, that come from our neighbors that, you know, probably really don't need to come here via a car. So if we can make it easier for folks to get here without a car, then, you know, hopefully they'll choose that.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. All right, Hiromi, we have another question for you. Is there a role in Palo Alto's strategy for hydrogen-powered vehicles?
Yes. You know what? Hydrogen fuel cells are something that has been around for a long time. And there are models such as the Toyota Mirai that, you know, drivers of that vehicle, they love them. The reality is the charging infrastructure is not growing. It's not comparable to what's happening with the EV charging infrastructure network across the country. And the other thing is there aren't a lot of choices. I've heard that, you know, fuel cells might be a great alternative for long haul, like trucks going cross country, may be a great way to go. But for light duty passenger vehicles, I'm not sure if that's the right direction. Great,
thank you. All right, this is a question for Hiromi and Rosie. So we're going to see a new face. Rosie's part of our transportation group. So some of us cannot bicycle. Can EV help those of us who cannot bicycle? So I think there's let's let Rosie go first, and then you're on mute, Rosie, and then we'll let Hiromi.
Okay, thank you. So the first question is, for those of us who can't bike, is an EV an option? And I'd look at that from a slightly different approach. It's not so much about which mode do you choose for everything. It's about which mode do you choose for which activity. If you're going somewhere that's a mile or two, I mean, the vast majority of people, they may think they can't do it, but then they do it and they realize it's pretty easy. It's not about figuring out why we can't do it. It's about figuring out why we can. This is a climate emergency and we all need to push ourselves out of our comfort zones and try new things. Now, in Safe Routes to School, we went from 25% of kids walking and biking to 67% of kids walking and biking. I guarantee you that at the beginning, there were a lot of parents that said, oh, I just can't do that, right? But through our 6Es approach, education, encouragement, enforcement, engineering, equity, evaluation, we created an environment that then made it easier for people to first off consider trips for walking or biking of 1 or 2 miles. As Sylvia said, 80% of those trips are currently made by vehicle that could be just made with the oldest form of transportation. And then on top of that, so you've got 1 or 2 miles you could walk, then maybe up to 5 miles you could bike, right? And then maybe from 5 to 10 miles, you would consider an e-bike, right? And then maybe 10 miles or more, consider a vehicle. And so it's better to look at it as what's the right tool for the right job, rather than one or the other. Sylvia,
and just to hop onto that before Hiromi jumps in, what is the right tool? That is the question. And for people who say, I can't bike because they are maybe older, maybe have balance issues, think that they can't, that's what was so, what was so revelatory about my neighbor Ginny, who I didn't even know, who was just biking past me one day when I took that picture. I don't know her, but I just said, hey, I love your bike. I love your adult trike. I'm going to get one when I can no longer ride my 2-wheel bike. Talk to me about your adult trike. And she loves it. She can take it to the store. It's great. So it's really, what is the right tool for the trip? Hiromi.
How do we educate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great options. I think that, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, whether it's not going to happen overnight. And ideally, people would just get rid of their cars. And that may happen. Like I said earlier, the vision for the future, if we're talking about vision for transportation in the future, it means people not owning cars anymore, because it'll be so convenient to have this driverless robot on wheels come and pick you up on demand when you need a car. And that would help with congestion, that would help with emissions. But there are a lot of people that I think will continue to want to own their own vehicle. And if that's the case, what we're asking people to do is consider an EV for their next car if they need to drive. And also, to consider, if you have multiple cars right now, can you bring that down to maybe 1 car instead of 2 or 3?
And can you live locally, right? I mean, my family doesn't own a car. I have kids, and we just choose to live locally, and we don't need, robot cars, or, we figure out how to make it work, and it improves everyone's quality of life. It makes the streets safer for everybody. It helps us, retain those values that are so important in our community, of being able to, like I said, it's not about, do you need an EV or not? It's what's the right tool for the right job. So for the most part, I hope we see more people choosing to walk or bike. It's a lifelong habit that improves our environment so dramatically. And when you start to live locally, then you realize, oh, I guess I don't need to drive like 10 miles out of town to get something. I could actually get it from my store, the milk thing, like Sylvia talked about, right? So there's going to be a lot of, I think, education in providing those options, and talking with people and helping them figure out what's the specific formula that works for them to get from point A to point B, right?
Great, thank you. All right, we're gonna switch gears and have a new face pop up. So Shiva, if you can put on your camera. Thank you, Rosie. How would local ban on registration of ICE vehicles be implemented, since DMV handles registration? Where did everybody go? Shiva, are you there? Okay. Do you want me to repeat the question since you're trying to get your camera up?
Sure.
All of a sudden, I'm the only face on the screen. Okay, so Shiva, the question is, how would local ban on registration of ICE vehicles be implemented since DMV handles registration?
Yeah, good question. We are kind of in the initial phase of exploring that option, so we don't have any definitive answer of if and when, how to do it. So we don't have any definitive answer at this time.
Did you want to add anything, Sylvia, for this one?
Sorry, say
That's
that
okay if you
again.
don't.
What was the question? Sorry.
About the ban on registration of ICE vehicles be implemented since the DMV handles registration.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Same answer.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're gonna have Hiromi pop back in. Thank you, Shiva. We appreciate seeing your face. Hiromi, what are the options of having EV chargers for those living in an apartment?
What are the EV charging options?
What are the options for having EV chargers for
Hmm.
those living in an apartment?
Well, I think what we're seeing is interest in level 1 chargers. So that's basically a standard 110 volt outlet that you could just plug your car into. It's slow, but it works. I did that one night and it was about 30 miles that I got on my car overnight, enough for me to get somewhere else so I could fuel up. I was hundreds of miles away from home. But the most common is the level 2 charger, which is faster. Most cars charge up, fully charged, probably 5 to 6 hours. And we are seeing a lot of interest from multifamily properties to put in, it used to be installing 1 or 2 ports or connectors. And now we're seeing people saying, wait, we want 10 of these or a dozen of these or 20 of these. So I think a lot of properties are feeling like they want to future-proof because their customers are starting to ask for it.
Just to follow up on that one, Hiromi, is the city giving incentives to homeowners who need to upgrade their electrical panel to accommodate EVs?
Not at this time. It is on the list of potential offerings. We'd love to offer it. We have so many great ideas, but only a limited number of funds. And so right now we're really focusing on, helping the multifamily sector build out their infrastructure. But it is in the back of our minds.
Okay, so we're gonna switch gears back to Sylvia. Okay, a powerful reason for walking or biking is to cope with the coronavirus. Automatic social distancing, getting out of the house, keeping sane, improves general health, helps if you get the coronavirus. Other cities are making changes to their traffic infrastructure in response to the coronavirus, specifically Paris and London are examples of that. Is Palo Alto going to use the coronavirus concerns to speed up changes?
Well, we have made some changes. We have a shared streets program that has put down some barriers well, they're not really barriers, it's more like signage on Ross Road, Park Boulevard, and on Bryant Street downtown to allow for more social distancing on streets that are already part of our bicycle network. And we did that early on in response to the pandemic and our need to give people more space in order to walk past each other and get off the sidewalk. Now that masks are more of are more normalized, I think the need for that is a little bit less. So when I am on those streets, I do see people still stepping off the sidewalk to go around there, other pedestrians and people using those streets for walking, biking, rollerblading even. It's really kind of amazing. So we've done some of that, not as a move, a move to do anything permanent. I think that's kind of what the questioner is asking. However, we are looking at what we can do to expand bicycling in town. And so we're gonna keep working towards this green transportation future, regardless of whether or not there's a pandemic. So.
Great, thank you. Sylvia, the next question's for you too. All right, sounds like you have set measurable goals for increasing e-car use. What measured goals are being set for other alternatives that are less impactful? Walking, biking, e-biking. The city works to accomplish its measured goals and objectives. Will these other modes be measured and tracked as e-cars will be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the metrics question is a good one. And I did include those 2 metrics in the presentation about how walkable or bikeable is your neighborhood. The 10-minute milk test is something that we could use. The 20-minute walk, bike ride, or transit test is another one. That one's for more services than just getting milk. So I'm open to talking to people about what metrics make sense. Yeah, so I'm, I do like the 10-minute and the 20-minute thing. And there's a lot of conversation right now about the 15-minute city. You can look that up, Google that, read about it. If that's something that residents, if that's a direction that residents wants to go, like I want to do that.
Great. All right, Sylvia, there's another question for you. We're getting up to the hour, but we're going to continue to answer questions. So can the city encourage or assist employers to hire within biking distance? And can the city encourage or assist residents to pick jobs within biking distance?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think from a legal standpoint, I don't think we can require that that people employ folks who are within biking distance of Palo Alto. We could probably highly encourage it, but not require that. And then what was the second one? Was
can the city encourage or assist residents to pick jobs?
Again, I mean, yeah, I think that's that would be something that we could encourage. I don't know that we can, mandate that. But I think how we encourage both of those is how we change our transportation system. If we make it easier and faster to get here by bike, which oftentimes it is, people are going to figure that out, and if we can support that with investments in education and encouragement, like Bike to Work Day, like a Safe Routes for Adults or Older Adults program, that would be a great way to get those messages out to folks, to let people know, hey, this is the best way to get here.
Great. This might be for Sylvia and Hiromi. So husband and I they're 76 years old. They use electric bikes within Palo Alto, but they like to go hiking. So how can they get to Foothills Park?
I just answered that, actually. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Rosie.
Yeah, it's kind of a long response. But if you want, I know you can answer that too, Sylvia. Or
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll read off my response more or less. So that is to say, I frequently e-bike myself to Foothills Park and even go camping sometimes. So, there is a back route that's really accessible and really low traffic. And if you're not aware of it, I'm happy to share the route with you. That said, from an accessibility standpoint, I know that other parks like Chabot in the East Bay do offer shuttles from the BART station up to the park. And I think that, that could really, be something worth looking into in terms of traffic reduction and measuring, the outcomes and the impacts of that. So Sylvia, you or Joanna can probably speak to the shuttle plans or the, where things are going with that. But I just wanted to commend you for riding your e-bikes all around town.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I want to mention is if you received the notice, the email from sustainability for this webinar, you noticed a child on a cargo e-bike. He was actually at Foothills Park, and it's Rosie's son on her e-bike. So that's exactly the kind of trip that we are talking about. So thank you to the couple who wrote in that question, because that's exactly the kind of thing. Take your e-bike up to Foothills Park. That's exactly what you could do. So I think that having a Safe Routes to Parks program would be a really interesting thing for us to do, because it would absolutely address this kind of route. Like, how could we get to Foothills Park without a car? That's exactly the kind of thing that a program like that would address. So.
Great. Well, I think we've answered most of the questions, or almost all of them, either live or through the Q&A, typing in the answers. What I would like to do is, can we have the staff that have all been working on this so people can see their faces, those that are here, and just pop on so that the people, there's a huge staff behind. We've got Rosie, we've got Jonathan, we've got Nathan, we have Joanna with transportation. Nate, you can come back on. We've got Lena, we've got Shiva, we've got Eric. So you guys can see this is a large staff that's working on this. Thank you, Lisa.
Wave to everyone. Thanks for coming today.
And then Christine, did you want to do just a closeout? Rosie's there.
Sure. So thank you all for joining us. We will be compiling all of the questions that you posed today, and even if there were some that we weren't able to answer, we'll do all the questions, write out all the answers, send that out to you. We will also send out the survey link for you as well. It's also posted on our website, so all the information is there. But thank you for joining us tonight for this very informative webinar. Our final 2020 SCAP webinar for this year will be on December 8th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. on the importance of the natural environment in meeting our sustainability goals. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll be sending you all more information, including a link to the recording, a link to the Q&A, and a link to the survey. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.